This is Tanzania, a land older than memory, where humanity first learned to stand upright, and the earth still remembers our footsteps. Here, the Serengeti breathes in millions. Hooves drum the ground like a heartbeat older than language. Lions watch, elephants remember. Life moves not by clocks, but by instinct. Snow crowns Kilimanjaro at the equator, a quiet contradiction rising through the clouds, reminding us that the world does not owe us logic. In Ngorongoro, creation folds in on itself, predator and prey circling an ancient bowl of time. At Lake Natron, flamingos paint the water pink, as if nature itself decided to dream out loud. Along the coast, Zanzibar tells another story. Carved doors, spice winds, prayers at dusk. Cultures collided here, loved here, bled here. Beauty layered with history that never fully sleeps. Tanzania is magic, strange, majestic, alive. And yet, even the most luminous places cast the longest shadows. Because ancient beliefs, when misunderstood, can rot into superstition, and suddenly to be different was to become invisible. A ghost, while still alive. It began as a whisper in the lake zone. Around 2007, the wind changed. For generations, albinism had carried a stigma. But this was different. Stigma turned into commerce. It started in the mining towns of Geita and the fishing villages of Mwanza. At first, the reports were scattered. A child missing on the way to school, a mother who never returned from the well. But soon, the scattered notes on police desks formed a pattern. A terrifying timeline emerged. Not once a year, not once a month. At the height of the crisis, nearly every week. And then the discoveries began. They didn't find bodies. They found remnants. Fishermen pulled things from the water that they refused to speak of. Farmers found evidence buried in shallow earth near the cotton fields. It became clear the victims were not being killed in fits of rage. They were being harvested. The Tanzanian police force found themselves chasing a phantom. Investigators arrived in remote villages, notebooks in hand. They found fear. They found silence. And a truth no one wanted to say out loud. Neighbors looked at the ground when questions were asked. The initial leads were confusing. Why here? Why now? Detectives collected what they could. Crude weapons left in the bush, vials of strange powders, hair. Evidence bags began to pile up in district stations. Photos were pinned to corkboards, connected by red string that spanned hundreds of miles. The government issued public statements, initially rooted in disbelief. They called for calm. They promised justice. But the police soon realized they weren't just hunting killers. They were investigating something far more organized. They were up against a market, a supply chain. Because in the gold mines and on the fishing boats, a rumor had taken root that the limb of a person with albinism could turn desperation into wealth. And suddenly, the investigation shifted. They stopped looking for a maniac and started looking for the buyers. To understand the buyers, you have to follow the money, because this was not just ritual, it was business. At the center of the web sat the brokers, rogue practitioners, witch doctors who twisted ancient traditions into a black market of flesh. They didn't sell cures, they sold luck. And in Tanzania, luck is the most expensive commodity of all. The lie was precise, and it was seductive. To miners in the Northwest, digging through rock for whispers of gold, they were told a potion made from human bone would make the earth surrender its riches. To fishermen on Lake Victoria, pulling up empty nets, they were told hair woven into the mesh would bring a catch so heavy it could sink the boat. Slowly, something shifted. A human being was no longer a neighbor. They became a resource, a charm, a commodity. But the most chilling detail was the price. These services were not cheap. A full set of charms could cost thousands of US dollars. In a country where many families survive on less than $2 a day, this revealed a brutal truth. The killers may have been desperate men with machetes, but the clients were wealthy, connected, powerful enough to pay for a life. This reality changed the atmosphere of the entire country. People with albinism were no longer just stigmatized, they were assets. Mothers stopped letting their children play outside. Men stopped walking home alone at night because they knew their worth had been calculated, measured, and sold. The police were no longer fighting superstition. They were trying to dismantle an industry where the raw material was a human being, sometimes a child. The world could no longer look away. Under international pressure and faced with a rising body count, the Tanzanian government declared war on the trade. In 2008, President Jakaya Kikwete revoked the licenses of all traditional healers. It was a sweeping ban. Suddenly, those who had operated in shadows were dragged into the light. Police raids swept through the lake zone. Over 200 suspects were arrested in a matter of months. Witch doctors, middlemen, even family members who had turned on their own kin. For the first time, the courts handed down death sentences. It was meant as a line in the sand, a signal that impunity was over. But justice is complicated. While the men who wielded the machetes went to prison, the wealthy buyers, the anonymous patrons who financed the killings, remained ghosts, unseen, untouched. And while the courts debated, the danger did not disappear. So the government made a drastic decision. If they couldn't stop the hunters, they would have to hide the prey. They established safe houses, government boarding schools converted into fortresses, places like Kabanga, Buhangije. Hundreds of children with albinism were gathered from their villages, taken from their families, placed behind high walls and iron gates. It was a solution born of urgency, but it came at a cost. Safety became segregation. Inside these walls, the children are alive. They play, they learn, they sing. They are safe from the machete, but they are cut off from the world. Parents were left with an impossible choice: keep your child at home and risk their death, or surrender them to the state, knowing you might not see them for months or even years. These centers became islands of survival, overcrowded, underfunded. But for the children inside, they offered the one thing the outside world could not: the chance to sleep without fear. They became refugees in their own country, protected by the very walls that imprisoned them. Time does not stop, even behind iron gates. The children of the safe houses grew up. They grew taller than the walls that were meant to protect them. And eventually they had to step back into a world that had once rejected them. What happened next is a truth divided. For some, survival became a springboard. They refused to be defined by the hunters. They became teachers, standing at the front of classrooms in the very villages where they were once hidden. They became civil servants, artists, advocates whose voices carried all the way to the United Nations. They returned not as ghosts, but as proof, living evidence that the myths were lies, that their bodies held no magic, only potential, but protection leaves its own kind of scar. You cannot lock a childhood away without a cost. For many, the transition was not a victory. It was a struggle. Years of isolation left gaps in confidence, in independence, in trust. The quiet trauma of knowing that your safety required your imprisonment. When the gates opened, the machetes were gone, but the stares remained. Discrimination did not vanish. It softened. It learned to whisper. Today, Tanzania is different. Better. The killings have decreased, laws are stronger. A new generation is growing up with more visibility and less fear. But for the generation of the crisis, the ones who spent their youth behind walls, the victory is bittersweet. They are alive. Some are thriving, some are still carrying it. And their lives force us to ask a question that lingers long after the danger has passed. What does it mean to be saved if the price you pay is your childhood? Tanzania is still here, still ancient, still luminous, still learning how to live with the shadows it did not choose. The land did not commit these crimes. People did, beliefs did, markets did. And yet, within this story of fear, there is resistance, survival, Voices that refuse to stay silent. Lives that proved myth is weaker than truth. This chapter leaves us with responsibility, not despair, because danger does not always arrive as chaos. Sometimes it arrives dressed as tradition, sometimes as opportunity, sometimes as silence. And the world does not run out of shadows. Next, our journey moves far from the savannas and salt lakes to the streets of Italy, where power wore a different face, where violence hid behind respectability, and where one man was allowed to harm again, and again, and again. Until someone finally asked why. Stay curious, stay cautious, and remember that even the most beautiful places deserve our attention when they whisper for help.